Okay, welcome back. Today we're going to be moving the dial on our Force of Change initiative, continuing to work through the creating accountability diagram, specifically focusing on what we refer to as the star chart. So here we go.
Welcome to the PAWCast.
All right, there it is. We made it.
We made it. All right, so the last couple weeks, or last couple sessions, I should say, we've been focusing on the creating accountability flowchart. It's, of course, on pawhealth.net/PAWCast. As we've kind of talked about the failure mindset, which the failure mindset is individuals who lack kind of shared purpose and impede the success of the team. Failure mindset is kind of a terminal path from when an accountable event occurs and there's a fault tolerance, which once the accountable event occurs, you have an individual choice to either collaborate or divide. So if you're kind of taking this route of division, which division is engaging in communication, which challenges shared purpose and well-being, ultimately you end at failure mindset. Ultimately you end at kind of low performance. On our diagram, it's performance 1 and 2, which is either failed performance or you're sort of perpetuating division because of a lack of consistency and competency. But the other side is sort of when these accountable events occur, you kind of jump into collaboration, which collaboration is providing the opportunity to improve performance and fulfillment. You jump into that creator role, which is sort of an individual who's focused on a desired outcome directed by intent and purpose. That's as you kind of make your way up that whole arc.
Yeah.
And that arc, of course, is getting to a solution through the forgiveness model, essentially creating a plan, and you can use resources like your mentors and leaders and sort of all these different things. And then from your plan, that's where you get into the actual implementation of the plan. And this is where we kind of ended off last session, where we talked about, all right, when you try to implement a plan, which is you really utilize those resources to try and that's what it is. It's trying the plan. And you can have a solid solution. Like you can have the answer to a problem. You've gone through the collaborative process. You have a solution, but sometimes implementation doesn't work. And that's where, again, from implementation, you can go back to that fault tolerance and make sort of an individual decision then and saying, okay, well, if you try to implement a plan and that plan fails, well, the natural reaction of like, well, we tried this and it didn't work, so nothing's going to work. That's as you move back into division, you move back into the failure mindset. But as you try to implement a plan and it doesn't work, or there is some failure in that plan, and you're like, all right, well, that didn't work. What can we try again? That's when you kind of go back through that arc. But eventually you're going to lead into what we've identified as the star chart, or ultimately trying to find ways in which we can succeed. So the star chart, we have a really abridged version on the creating accountability chart. It's kind of centered towards the top in green. But if you guys go to pawhealth.net/PAWCast, I believe it's under our education system, pages, what did we say, 3 through 6, I believe, of the education PDF. That's going to be the focus of kind of these next couple of podcasts, is us kind of talking about the star chart. So to kind of familiarize ourselves with the tool, page 3 of that diagram of the education system is, if you have overlay, is essentially just a huge summary of the star chart. We have covered this at least a little bit in past casts, but that was a tough one. But today, of course, we're going to go a little bit more in depth. The next couple of sessions we'll go kind of a little bit more in depth on how to utilize this tool, and kind of just look at it again from that standpoint, as looking at it as a resource.
Yeah. And so the reason that we originally put this together was, as I switch cameras here, maybe I'm doing a new thing today. There we go.
Yeah, there we go.
So the reason that we originally put this together was really to put some wheels on why, like explaining why success actually didn't happen. So it was kind of responsitory, and like when we have these events and then we circle back into a failure mindset, even though we went through the whole thing, like, well, what about this plan? What about this implementation didn't actually work?
Yeah.
And, you know, because we've kicked around the concept of performance potential for years.
A long time, yeah.
And that's where if I in a previous podcast episode, I'll throw a link in. You know, we talked a lot about, you know, the that performance potential grid, kind of where, you know, a star child or a problem child, star players, that sort of stuff. But what we found was that was not a inclusive enough description of what everything that actually you know, encapsulated why things didn't happen. So we had to explain that out further.
Yeah, and it came from people were just having different conversations.
Yeah.
So we were all talking about performance and potential, but we weren't actually speaking maybe the same language, but a completely different perspective. And that's where I think a lot of people have a hard time committing to this type of diagram, because when we talk about this diagram, and as we go through teaching this tool, we talk about high-low. It's just yes or no, the light switch is on or off, black and white, ones and zeros. Is it a high performance or low performance? And it, you know, part of the discussion path is like, well, it's sort of this and it's kind of that, and I feel like it's, you know, 80% this. But when you look at it from a problem solving standpoint, like you really want zero nuance. And
yeah, it's really hard to especially when you consider accountability,
Yeah.
kind of what we talked about last time, is like you really have to be able to individually assign, because when you have objective measures that are individually owned, then you can actually implement a solution because you have one set point that you're trying to fix. And then when we were having those conversations, and the thing that created the nuance was like, well, it wasn't an absolute failure. It was you know, I feel like I'm not an absolute like low performer. I don't have no potential, and that ambiguity. You know, a part of it in the original implementation turned into a hefty administrative workload, because it was like, you're right, I can't say that you're all to blame. And then as a means of control, we ended up doing so much work to try and help that out, and which ultimately that didn't work either. Because too much was on one plate, and then it just ended up being the bottleneck. So then the other four, the C variables of consistency, competence, confidence, and clarity came about as a means to try and isolate down what was actually creating the issue. And then when realizing in that process that if we can have 4 out of 6 of these variables, essentially, we're doing great.
Yeah. And that was, you know, part of that nuance is kind of the same thing we talk about with our after actions and case reviews. It's like, if there is nuance where it's like black and white, yes, no, ones and zeros, was this a success? Was this a failure? And it's like, well, maybe. It's like, okay, there hasn't been enough conversation. We haven't defined enough variables. We haven't broken this problem down enough. We haven't collaborated enough to really create a solution. Because like you said, as soon as you can identify what the actual problem was, if it's like, well, this was it was like 80% success. All right, fine. 80% success, wonderful. What was the 20%? Let's hone in on that part, because we're having this conversation because it was probably an 80% failure. So you know, and that's the other thing too, where it's, you know, these conversations are not a kumbaya. It's like, let's just talk about it.
Well, and that's typically like in those conversations, like what happens is when you start to mix this like idea of like, well, it's not totally like you think it's 20, I think it's 80, and you start to have a conversation that is completely useless, because it's just about finding a compromise about like how much of this was a problem, not what was the problem.
Absolutely.
It's super easy to fall into that pattern, but ultimately, like, this is a way to be like, okay, like, I'll give you that one. Like, I'm not here to talk about how much of this was a problem. I'm just here to solve the problem. And then once we solve the problem, then we have a 0% problem.
Correct.
And that's really what we're aiming for in all of this.
And that was, I mean, honestly, part of, at least a little bit, when you and I started working together originally way back on the consultation side, is you kind of broke even my brain of that pretty quick. It was, you know, we caught swinging the 2x4 or what have you. It's just like, you know, we have got to focus objectively. And as soon as I heard that, I was like, oh, okay, fine. Let's get emotion out of this. Let's focus on what it is and then problem solve. So yeah, it is something that's very difficult. It is like everything else we talk about. It is a muscle flexed. Is the more times we go through it, it becomes easier and easier and easier. And then once your brain is in that mindset, then that's the end of it. Then you're just, it's actually you waste less time on those things that are not worthy of your time. You say you can always make more money, but you can't make more time. So when we focus on that, now kind of course, getting into the star chart, we'll kind of make our way around it. And I know, again, we've had other podcasts on this, but we really want to kind of bring this together as a all-encompassing tool here. So page 3 of the education system is kind of our broad picture all in one. It has the star chart, which is the 3 axes of performance and potential. Those two go together. Confidence and competence, that's the next axis. Those go together. And then consistency and clarity. Those two things go together. So what we have kind of towards the bottom is you'll kind of see where, let's just talk about the performance and potential grid initially. So performance is vertically, that's the y-axis, and then potential is horizontally, which is the x-axis. So when we look at this, we're going to talk about the ones and zeros, the yes and no's. Is when we talk about performance, we often talk about, is it high performance or low performance? Is it high potential? Is it low potential? And each of those sort of areas, so when we have high performance, high potential, we call that a star player. And again, we're going to cover this more here in just a few minutes. I'm just kind of describing how these charts are laid out. High performance, high potential is a star player, whereas high potential, low performance is a problem child, or high performance, low potential is referred to as a backbone, iceberg. So as you kind of make your way around these charts, that's as we're going to start to talk about this, and we're going to go more in depth into these next couple of pages. But clarity and consistency are the next thing. So clarity on the vertical, which is the Y, consistency on the horizontal, which is the X, confidence, moving on, is on the Y, competence, of course, is on the X. And what we're going to talk about is sort of the star, star, star. So star, as you move through those lists, are high, high, high. So high clarity, high consistency. And to kind of take a little jump from this one-page summary over to or creating an accountability diagram, getting back to the growth mindset, getting back to the failure mindset, is you'll actually see, I had made notation of this earlier, is in the bottom right-hand corner of performance 1, you'll actually see these 2 little small stars, 3 little small stars in the corner, which means that on these axes, we've failed 2 out of 3 axes. Whereas with your performance 5, that's towards the top of the diagram, top right, we've actually succeeded on 2 of the 3 axes. And that's, of course, what Ben had said just a few moments ago. So when we talk about this, it's a matter of high, high, low, 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 high, any combination thereof. But as we move through each of these corners, we're going to see where there are issues in this that are individual. There are issues that are administrative. So as we go through the star chart and we have these conversations like we've talked about in past with after actions and case reviews, is that administration has to be just as willing to collaborate as the creator. So your mentors, your leaders have to be willing to accept a certain amount of responsibility if that responsibility has fallen on them.
Yeah, what we actually kind of found, and we'll get into it once we get into the details, it accidentally balanced out pretty well, is that like consistency and competence kind of fall on the individual, clarity and confidence kind of fall on the team, or individuals that are responsible, I should say, for those variables. And then performance and potential really kind of is the individual. Don't really have a lot of control as a team or as a company or as a large group on an individual's performance or potential. Really, that's their ultimate, like what they walked in with and what they realized. But there will be kind of a blend. So this isn't a way of saying like this, of over defining it to the point where it's all the individual's problem to solve. It's a means of just problem solving and helping find what was missing. And that's when we look at kind of even leading on to that part and saying that the performance and potential really kind of has a lot to do with the individual. Is that's that third line actually that came almost actually after the star chart was created. I think it was a couple of months after the star chart was created, that line of fulfillment. So what we really want to keep most people on is sort of in that top right
right category of fulfillment, meaning that you're having, decent fulfillment on performance and potential and being a star player and so on and so forth. Because you can have problem children that are fulfilled. You can have backbones that are fulfilled, but you don't want to lose fulfillment. As we lose fulfillment, that's basically a loss of fundamental.
And that was the whole previous podcast of talking about kind of like the circle of death, basically of going from problem child to star player and then losing fulfillment and being a backbone, and then boom, you're an iceberg, and boom, you're out the door. Definitely there's a lot of existing content on that, which I'll throw up in a link.
Yeah, for sure. So, all right, moving to page 4, which is actually kind of the page 2 of our star chart diagrams. So this is where we kind of jump a little bit more into performance and potential. So a lot of this, again, we do have it linked up with our education system. So a lot of what's written in here, again, if you guys go through the education system PDF, you'll kind of see where some of these are a little bit more defined. But for us, when we start to look at performance, this attribute is rated according to kind of the tier 3 growth plan and skills rubric. We've kind of started to use the skills rubric a little bit less. It was one of those like really heavy things where it was almost like the paperwork was a little more overbearing than it was worth. But either way, when we talk about the tiers of our education system, tier 1, 2, 3, 3 is really more of that every couple of months, every 6 months, the priorities, the initiatives, it's our growth plan process on saying, what are we doing in the long term? And when we look at performance, it's kind of broken out into 3 areas. And this was actually kind of when we talked about performance reviews, this is kind of our 3 main focuses. And one of those, of course, was role effectiveness. So it's not quote unquote your job, but the roles that you have been delegated or that you have taken on. I mean, we have roles, everything from, our inventory coordinator to technical leads to, associate vets. I mean, it's just whatever it is that your functions are. That's going to be one of the big ones on performance. How are you rating as far as your role effectiveness? Next one, of course, is what we want everyone is core value alignment. So that's a huge part of what it means to be a functional part of the team, not just in paw health, but in any team, is your core value alignment. For us, it's trust, unity, respect, and accountability. So how are you really kind of aligning in those categories? And then the other one is just time allocation and usage. Third being time allocation and usage is just more of, are we really effective and efficient with the roles that we have? And that's where it can kind of get a little bit kind of wishy-washy, where it's like sometimes you have people that are a little bit slower, but they're really meticulous and there's like 0 errors, versus the ones that are like really, really fast and they get the job done quickly, but then there's cleanup on the backside from, an error standpoint. So it's not time allocation and usage isn't just how fast are you, it's how effective.
Well, that was a weird like conversation in the way that variable developed, because it was like, well, to be effective, don't you have to be efficient? And like what we actually found was like, not really.
Not really.
Because how well you are doing something and how quickly you're doing it, those are 2 different things. I used to conflate those 2 variables myself. And once we kind of had some unique experiences, I don't even know how to describe them, but basically like we just put this thing to the test. That's what it is. We tried this out and found like, well, actually you're really good, but you're kind of slow. Like, so how do you get better? Well, you get a little bit quicker. Well, what's it going to take for you to get quicker? And that was where the 4C variables started to come out of. Like, what are you lacking in actually picking up your pace? I don't want you to lose how well you're doing it.
No.
Or
still be good,
and actually, I think the reverse happened kind of simultaneously with different people. Was you're way too fast and your quality sucks.
Yes.
You need to slow down.
Yes.
What is missing to cause you to slow down? Confidence. That was the thing. A little foreshadowing there. But it like that happened all at the same time as this tool was kind of just in process and trying to, we were working out the full attempt of utilization of performance and potential, found the gap, expanded it out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's just part of that collaborative process. Hey, how can we make this better? And that's where, again, for us, we're more than willing to try something and fail, because we know as soon as we fail, we're going to make it better. So that's even in this. It's, so anyway, so moving into potential, Potential has a little bit more to do with tier 4. So tier 3 is kind of growth plan and process for the individual. Tier 4 is certainly growth within the individual, but it's more of the application of one's performance. So when we start to look at tier 4, that's what we refer to as our professional advancement guidelines. We have individual advancement and we have industrial advancement. So an individual advancement is more of not just how well are you doing with yourself and can you make yourself better, but it's can you help advance the other individuals around you. So that's where, again, if we kind of jump back to our creating accountability flowchart, as you kind of move through that growth mindset, as you come through success into the growth mindset, and as you start to make that swing up into performance 3, 4, 5, and you jump over to then the collaborative process, which is now to the left-hand side of the diagram, that's where we talk about our mentors and leaders. So individual advancement is, we absolutely want you to advance yourself because that is a part of performance. If you have low performance and high potential, it means you have the potential to improve your own performance. But then once you really get into that higher performance and higher potentials, keeping a high potential simply means that you're going to jump over to a mentor, you're going to jump over to a leader. And from a definition standpoint, is a mentor is an individual that provides encouragement and support to the creator as a resource, whereas a leader is an individual who's focusing on growth by holding the creator accountable. So it's two different ways that we're focusing on how to help the creator forward. So that's when we look at sort of that individual advancement. That is one big part, is focusing locally, focusing on the individual level, focusing on taking those people who also have lower performance and sort of boosting up their performance as well. Because, similar colors run alike. I mean, it's one where it's like, hey, I struggled at that. This is how I got through that. So.
Well, and everybody is going to do that in their own way. So like we'll get into, once we get a little bit further down, we'll talk about how like basically every time you hire somebody, there's the belief that they are of high potential. So like everyone, it's theoretically can get there, but the way that mentorship and leadership is implemented is, I don't know the exact variable that dictates it, but they are individually determined. And it's because some of it's skill, some of it's natural tendency, some of it's just training, that sort of stuff. And like the best example is you and I sitting in the same room. Like you're a better mentor. I am more naturally a quote unquote leader. Like I just like to run out in front of everybody and just kind of kick some butt. But I like, not to say that you can't do that, but I know like your tendency is typically to get everybody kind of just picking up the pace as a whole, whereas I'm just like, I'm going to trudge through it, and I'm going to show you people that you can do it, and you're going to kind of learn the hard way a little bit, which we found wasn't necessarily the most effective means, but in the right context, it can. But again, like it's just the utilization of potential, again, can kind of be dictated by the individual.
And I think there is some overlap, like you said, in being mentors and leaders. You each kind of do it your own way. In my brain, I sort of think of leaders as, like you said, taking charge, leading from the front. Mentors are leading from the back. So it's your who's at the front of the line, who's at the back of the line, but you're both walking the same line in the same direction. That's where on one hand the leader's like, yep, this is how you do it, come on. The mentor's more of like, all right guys, come on, like I'll let's get together, show you how move. So but there is some overlap in that.
And that's why shared purpose and mission is so vitally important, because if you're leading from different areas, you have to know which way you're pointing. So again, previous podcast content really about shared purpose and well-being, that sort of stuff. Go dive deeper into that, because what that does is it sets your course and then lets you be who you naturally are, because you know you're confident and you're safe to lead in the way that you are best at. And there's not going to be a discrepancy between among the team where you're like pointing the wrong way, and then you're all headed in the same direction once you know what your shared purpose is.
Exactly. And probably actually the line is fulfillment that we're all walking. But anyway, so when we talk about then potential, the other part to potential is what we call industrial advancement. So industrial advancement. So if you think of individual advancement as local level, industrial advancement is more of community, state, industry wide. So of course doing work with universities and taking on mentees from in different veterinary nursing curriculums or DVM curriculums, just trying to move the dial, not just in one clinic in one location, but like, hey, let's spread this word, let's get these tools out. So industrial advancement, of course, for us, a lot of our integration with Michigan State, with of course PAWCast, with all the stuff we have coming down our education system here in 2021. But in any event, so that's kind of the big thing as we talk about performance and potential. Yep. So kind of defining out low performance, low potential, high performance, high potential, and every sort of variable thereon is now jumping into the first one we call star players. So I think everybody wants to be a star player. Everyone wants to think that they have high performance and high potential.
I'm going to say everyone thinks they want to be a star player. There's an operative difference between thinks that wants to and thinks that they want to.
Yeah, true. Yes. And actually now that we've kind of flipped over to having self-assessments, I think it's kind of helped that just a little bit. But, but in any event, so when we talk about star player, graphically, that's the top right corner of our grid there, being that a star player is someone who has high performance and high potential. So the first thing is coming down into our individual bullet points. Star players perform at a high level within their skill set. And star players have a high potential for advancement, and star players are always fulfilled in their roles. So the idea there is that we're talking about performance potential, so it's high, but then also looking at our line of fulfillment is there's never a star player who is unfulfilled. Actually, I would say that if you have a star player, they're probably the rapid decliners into icebergs if they lose that level of fulfillment. I would say it's a rapid movement, whereas with your backbones and your problem child, you have a little bit of slush in there. But the whole idea with star players, of course, on high performance and high potential, the idea is that these individuals typically have consistency, clarity, confidence, competence, not always, but that's where you have more people in this high performance, high potential category that are leading over to being mentors and being leaders. So you can still have failures. Just because you're a mentor and leader doesn't mean you can't have failures. Doesn't mean that you can't have failures of implementation and failures of plan. We're all collaborative, but just generally speaking, star players execute exceptional performance and show ongoing initiative to not only better themselves, but better the team and better the industry.
Yeah, I mean, as these resources have developed over the last 2 years, star players collaborate. We could probably shorten that sentence now.
Yes.
They are the most willing to collaborate.
Yeah.
But that does not mean that they don't fall.
Yeah, correct.
They're the ones that get up. They're the ones that collaborate again, and they keep the loop going.
Yep.
Because they're able to hold the perspective that the more that we collaborate, the more that we get through, our accountability process and through forgiveness and into actually implementing these plans that are shared, the more that we're able to realize success.
Yes.
That is it's really star player isn't. Don't get me wrong, performance is huge. You have to be good at what you do, but it is just as equally important to have a mindset that you're walking into every experience thinking that you're going to be a star player, and what does it mean? And I'm not gonna waver on that.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Everything is a success. Everything is a success. It's just not a success yet.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Just constant optimism.
Yep. Hard to do, by the way, in case anyone is wondering, because there are honestly a limitless number of variables that are going to knock you off of that. And that's as we get into consistency, clarity, confidence, and competence, those variables help us define what is taking us out of this star player mindset as well, and out of the desire to collaborate.
Yep, and that's then when we sort of look at then a backbone. So the thing here that I really caution talking about backbones is we need people to understand that backbones are not necessarily a negative. Backbones are a negative if they lose fulfillment. But when we talk about low performance, it doesn't always necessarily mean that this is a negative. It just means that the potential is low. So here we go. So a backbone, when we start to look at performance and potential, is that a backbone is someone who has high performance but low potential. And again, remember how potential is defined as sort of the individual and industrial advancement. So backbones, generally speaking, perform at a really high level within their growth plan. So we're talking about tier 3, that's role effectiveness, core value alignment, time allocation and usage. So these are people who usually typically perform very well in that category, but really struggle with the potential of professional advancement. Are they struggling with advancing their own skill set? Are they struggling with helping others do better? Are they struggling with advancing within the industry? So is it hard to take the 30,000 foot view versus sort of that day to day? So when we start to look at that line of fulfillment here, because remember, star players are always fulfilled. When we look at backbones and we talk about a fulfilled backbone versus an unfulfilled backbone, fulfilled backbones are essentially the foundation of the team. So when we look at a fulfilled backbone, that's someone who can come in, they can execute their role effectively, they got good core value alignment, they're not having issues with necessarily inefficiency, but we talk about one of the two biggest problems in the profession is unnecessary conflict and inefficient process. That's not these people. They're efficient, there's no conflict, they're doing their job well and effectively, their time allocation and usage is pretty much right where it should be, whether it be slow but it's effective or likewise. Those are really the foundation of the team. So I think that's what, like I said, one of the negative connotations when you hear of low potential, it's these people are there to do the job, but they may not be the best at collaborating from a problem-solving standpoint. So they can do it, but they don't know why they do it well, which again isn't a problem, isn't necessarily a problem. But again, when we start to look at the collaborative process, you could see as of having low potential for just not great at, collaborating. And when you jump over to then being an unfulfilled backbone, so that's where there's been some type of a break. So you have a backbone who actually was maybe trending towards high potential. They were actually kind of a backbone who was starting to become a star player, but there was really something that just kind of took that wind out of their sails, and they started to lose their overall fulfillment in the workplace from a role effectiveness and core value and their timing. So if you have someone who's slow at a task but effective and you're just jamming down their throat, be faster, be faster, be faster, be faster, but they really take pride in their work. So when they're rushed, they're just feeling that you're making me do this and I'm doing a bad job, and you're trying to make them something that they either don't want to be or can't be. But when you kind of expand out that portion of backbone is saying that backbones often go unnoticed, and fulfilled backbones are among the most valuable individuals within the team. However, unfulfilled backbones will become icebergs if administration places barriers in their way from seeking professional advancement, or if failed administrative policies remove fulfillment. So that's what I'm kind of saying is that if you have these fulfilled backbones who are trying to become star players, but you have this standard org chart, where it's like it's a hierarchy and they want to do better and they want to help more, but administration is keeping them in their place. No, this is what you need to do and you can't do more than that because I'm not going to let you. Or the other side where it's policies, like I said, policies are you have to do better, you have to do better. And I think this is that's what we talk about, the foot that's basically pushing backbones into being icebergs is a lot of that part that administrative policies that remove fulfillment is when you get into a corporate environment where all they talk about is pushing the invoice, pushing the sale, what's your performance, here's your numbers, negative accrual, you didn't do better, you need to do better, and next month, and it's going to affect your income if you don't do better. It's like, well, but for us, generally speaking, we are a profession of altruism.
Yeah, I was gonna say like that, like the boot in of administrative policy is gonna be the thing. Like you're gonna lose fulfillment most often. That's okay. That's why numbers are so kind of pertinent to the conversation. Like, yes, we're loaded with altruistic type people. but being aware of kind of what your values are, what motivates you, because I always like to think about this like, what can I control, right?
Yeah.
So if we're talking to somebody that doesn't work here, and they don't really feel fulfilled, like, well, what actually is fulfillment to you? Define it, even as an individual, because like, what motivates me is different from what motivates you, what motivates to everybody else listening to this.
Right.
So like for me, I love numbers. I love that concept of like, how do we boost this up?
Yeah.
In a safe and effective way.
Right.
Whereas other people, and again, like just by nature of the industry that we work in, being heavy altruism, heavy with the desire to help, the more that you have administration that pushes the concept of numbers, the less fulfilled they're going to be. Because what it does is it's like, this is a concept that I'm kind of working on. I think I got it pretty much wrapped up of like, you've got purpose, which should be shared, but you have to have process, and you have to have an individual's return on investment. And the bigger of a gap or basically a lapse between ROI and protocol, the less fulfilled that person is going to be, because they don't actually see how what they're doing fulfills the shared purpose and then ultimately feeds them. So you have to know who you are, but you also have to know who you're working for. And if you feel like you're being pushed into being an iceberg, you probably are.
Yeah, right. Yes, that's probably occurring. Yeah. But and that's where I think the tricore for us is so valuable, because it, when we start to talk about fulfillment, we start to talk about, what is it that you as an individual are seeking. That's actually part of, or at least one of our screening mechanisms for employment. Is just saying like, not that we want everyone to be the same. We do want diversity within the team. That's not what we're saying but it's looking at that values index.
The screening mechanism isn't to say that there is a right way to be motivated or a wrong way.
Yes.
It is, all right, I'm going to ask you a couple pointed questions to see if you have any idea how you are actually motivated. Because when you really know the tool and you know how to interview well, it's really easy to tell if somebody lied. Like, that's the only way I can really say it. Like, because if you're self-defined, like that, when I was really heavy into interviewing, when I first started here, and even before I was working at Catch-All, like, I wasn't necessarily asking interview questions to know if someone is going to be good at a job or not, because especially from the consulting side, I can't ask that question. Like, how am I going to ask a mechanic if he's going to be a good mechanic? Like, what's a transmission, sir? Like, that's not that hard to do. But what I would do would be more interpersonal, but it would really be pointed towards how much self-awareness is there. And in those conversations, like the people that would know who they are, I would recommend pretty much all the time, regardless of what their mechanical potential was. I can teach to what you can do with your hands. I can't necessarily teach you what to do with your brain. If you've ever read The Ideal Team Player, I can't teach hunger. I can't make you want something. So that's where I kind of lost my train of thought there, so I hope you can kind of bring it back around.
No, it definitely with, when we start to talk about that boot into backbones and talking about your return on investment and, those different parts of, are we self-aware? Do we know what we're feeling, or do we know what we're thinking? And that's where sometimes when you're in this backbone category, which isn't a negative necessarily, we're talking about it from a performance and potential standpoint, is that as you start to feel this weight pushing you out of fulfillment, it's how self-aware are you to know, is this actually something that I am doing to myself? Is this something that administration is pushing on me? Are there barriers in my path? And that's actually, I think when you talk about sort of the individual loss of fulfillment as you're going in that direction where you had fulfillment and you are losing it, that's where as we start to say, how do we move through this chart? How do I know what is happening? How can I problem solve? How can I objectively assess not only my circumstances, but also myself? And that's, I think, very difficult for people, to really look at themselves and understanding, oh, well, I may actually have put this barrier up in front of me, or, the administration has, and it is kind of on both sides. It's not always administrator's fault.
Sometimes the mirror is the hardest thing to look at, right?
Yeah, and I do like holding up the mirror, and this is actually not on the interview side, but it's more of on the performance side. Is just, really it's as I talk, and I just quick then hold the mirror in front of my face so they see not me asking the question, but really themselves. It's a very sort of difficult thing to do effectively and make it their idea.
Well, there's a reason that you were, and actually I haven't heard it in a while, but we're commonly referred to as Senator Riolo. Like you're just you're good with words. You can turn that into a quality engagement, but that is a high risk, high reward thing to do, and that's like. Proceed with caution if that is your plan for sure. But it is all like if you're looking for result, if you're able to show somebody in a way that is effective, like what they're actually saying and how it is destructive to themselves, that is like what you're doing is you're breaking the victim mindset. That's essentially what it. Now we've dove into that pretty substantially, but high risk, high reward. But once you are able to create a mechanism that breaks failure mindset, then you can point it out, and it's like, hey, remember that thing that you did when you broke it before? Let's try it again.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the mind control where it's your thoughts, their words. Yeah, it's you're kind of trying to focus them and push them in the right direction. Yep, and that's actually part of the mentality of quick to fire. Yeah, is it's you try to give them the tools and really point them in the direction and, really kind of have those conversations. Like I'm willing to have a 2-hour conversation about a 4-minute problem, but really just kind of taking the long road. And that's part of that part of being a mentor leading from the back is it's like, all right, let's try to steer this behemoth into the right direction. And it's like, I have had experiences with past employees, both current and past, or I should say past experiences with employees that are here no longer, is that you try to steer them in the right direction. Try to keep them on that line of fulfillment, and if they just zip right off, it's like, okay, we're probably not going to and that's part of the return on investment. Is that if just as a mentor, just continuing to do all of the work, you need a mentor and mentee to essentially put in equal amount of work.
But as a transition to get into the next one, is that gets us into problem children. Correct. Because typically those that this definition came out of like, there's this person that I know can succeed. Correct. I know as a mentor or a leader or whatever, I know that this person can succeed. I see it. Yes. And they just refuse to. Yes. They refuse to perform well, and I have no freaking idea why. Yes. Tell me a little bit about problem children.
Yes. So by definition, so again, leading off the backbone into this now is saying, so problem children is someone who, generally speaking, has low performance and has high potential. That is every new hire. So every single new hire starts out as low performance, high potential. They interviewed well, their resume was good, you thought they'd be a good fit, they made it through the door, they made it through the process, they're here. So we need to give credit to the point that they are actually here, because there's a lot of people who interviewed who didn't get here, right? But we can't automatically put all new hires into high performance, high potential. They will fail. So if we start out by saying, okay, it's all base one. I know you've had past experiences with past employers or experiences while you were in school or experiences anywhere else in the world, but we have a lot of stuff we got to do here. We got to talk about role effectiveness. We got to talk about core value alignment. You have never had our core values before, so you have zero performance on our core values. We don't know time allocation and usage. You said you can do this role effectively, but we don't actually know how much time it's going to take you. So we have to look at those variables objectively, role effectiveness, core values, time allocation as a low when you are first hired. People hate hearing that, but it's just the objective reality. Well, we're not saying you're low and you're low. We're saying, no, you're starting low, but you have a high potential to do really well.
Just basically like assume that everyone's going to be terrible at their job. When they start, but you're also the hiring process is the mechanism to assume that someone is going to perform well at some point.
Yes, you are hiring potential.
Yes, that's what you're doing.
That's what you're doing. And that's where, like I said just a few moments ago with the mechanic, is it's like, really we're not talking about how good you are at being a mechanic. We're talking about your individual thought process that provides you the opportunity for potential.
There's definitely things where you got to have like benchmarks or like baselines.
Sure.
So you're not going to hire an ASE certified technician that doesn't have an ASE certification. You're not going to hire a doctor that isn't a doctor necessarily.
Correct. Yes.
There's definitely baselines that people do have to meet certain qualifications. But don't. This could get us into a whole millennial and like the 5 years experience, like 1 year out of school, like that whole conversation and how it's completely freaking unrealistic.
Yes.
But just know that when you're hiring someone, high potential, low performance right off the gate.
That's what you want, or that's what you should expect.
Yes.
So, and then their growth curve is different. That's tier 3, right? Growth. So it's just some are going to be faster or slower than others. But here we go. So a problem child is someone who struggles with performance straight out the gate. But again, as you get into further parts of employment, so for us, our tier 1 and tier 2 combined, we call basic training. That's the first 90 days of employment. So really, it's not that. It's yes, you have the expectation that every new hire is a problem child, but you don't want all of your employees to stay as problem children.
Right.
So that's as we kind of move through this and saying that it's like, well, you start out struggling with performance, but your performance should improve with time. And when you look at sort of the high potential, it's that you do legitimately have a high potential for professional advancement. Now, remembering that professional advancement tier 4 is either individual advancement or industrial advancement. So we're saying that we have the opportunity to do better. Problem children are another category that is split on fulfillment. So you have a fulfilled problem child or you have an unfulfilled problem child. And that's where essentially your fulfilled problem children are basically rising stars. So you're kind of coming out of that problem child state, and we're really trying to get you into that star player category where star player is high performance, high potential. Now, again, you can go from problem child to star player and over to a fulfilled backbone. That is totally appropriate. There's no problem with that. So you're kind of fluctuating. You guys can kind of see here, from a diagram standpoint, how fulfillment is so important between problem child, star player, and backbone, is that you really want to stay on that side of fulfillment because you can fluctuate between those 3 categories. Ideally, everyone wants to be star players, but if we look at it realistically, we want everyone to be star players or backbones. We don't want very many people to stay as problem children long term. So generally speaking, fulfilled problem children become rising stars, and unfulfilled problem child become icebergs. So whether these are the new hires that had high potential, but they just, that's why we have the different breaks. Tier 1 is 1 week for most of our staff, 2 weeks for CSS. But then the first 90 days is tier 2. That's why we have that break at the 40 hours and 3 months is essentially to be like, okay, in the last 3 months for basic training, like came in with high potential, low performance. Like what were you able to do in the last 3 months using the resources that you have available, our mentors, our leaders, collaborative process, so on and so forth, to increase your overall performance. And if you really have people that are just, having a hard time with both for performance and potential, then they're going to, of course, go that iceberg category and they get offboarded.
Yeah, and this is why getting into the next, the 4C variables was so important, because what we're kind of talking about is there are influences in that process that can be very blended. So the actual improvement of performance is definitely something that can be an individual's responsibility, but it can also be an administrative one. So what are the mechanisms that are exploring this person's performance and actually improving it within that kind of opportune time of really the first 3 months? Because almost every job, like I'd say you're gonna be at least 3 months before you're even like okay at it. At least, I'm saying okay, just operating at an okay level. But then there's also, so you've got like, what are the mechanisms administratively that are pointing people in that direction? How effective are they? But you've also got how much and how well is this person engaging in these processes? So when we were, in those, that 40 hour and that in between time, and also at the 90 day, which are our scheduled and designated touch points, but there's touch points all along the way. It's definitely a conversation from the company to the person of how are you doing, like how well are you doing, but also a part of that conversation is how well does this fit with you? Because you're also trying us on. Absolutely. And that, so there's a blended approach within these two things, but really the question is like, how are you seeing fulfillment, essentially? Like, is this job something that you're going to be able to perform at a high enough level to be fulfilled? But also, is it essentially something like, I don't know the right way to word it, but does it matter enough to you is the other variable that's in there.
Yeah, and that's where, I mean, in past podcasts we talked about the rage quitter, you know, where it's really more of an idea of everyone starts at low performance, high potential. But I think the big thing to focus on what you just said was the engagement component. Yeah. So it's how well are you engaging this process? How well are you engaging role effectiveness? How well are you engaging core value alignment? How well are you engaging time allocation and usage, individual advancement, so on and so forth? Because I think the reason, and I shouldn't even say the think, I know why we had expanded upon performance to have those three variables is because it is a common saying I don't know, just our industry, but definitely in the veterinary industry, where it's like, as long as I'm the best doctor, that's the only thing that matters. As long as I'm the best technician, that's the only thing that matters. As long as I treat patients, that's the only thing that matters. So it's the individual has then made the decision that obviously that's the only thing that matters, but it completely breaks apart everything that the company stands for, everything that the team stands for, because we stand for role effectiveness, we stand for core value alignment, we stand for, you know, time allocation and usage, we stand for individual advancement, mentorship, and, you know, so when you have someone who is really just rooted in being sort of having unnecessary conflict because they in their life have defined themselves of having conflict, and it's the, you know, the reality TV show and all these things that are jammed down our throat culturally, and just saying like, this is how you're supposed to act as an adult. No, that's how you're supposed to act as somebody in high school, as middle school, but coming into an adult professional environment, we really need to have, you know, people that are willing to engage, collaboration. So when you have a problem child, to identify a problem child who's going to become a backbone or star player, or identify a problem child who's going to become an iceberg, it's how well do they engage your process. Because if they don't engage your process, that's it. They've already moved themselves to being low potential, low performance. They're not going to get better, because in 3 months' time, they showed you they just didn't care enough to do anything other than that which fulfilled themselves. And that's where, for us, we really focus hard on shared purpose. We really focus hard on shared fulfillment, on shared well-being. That's what is the fundamental of the company. But as soon as you have an individual that really focuses on what's important to just them, and they're not team players, they're not star players, they're never going to be backbones, they're going to go right from problem child going into our next category, which is an iceberg.
So the other side of that, just before we move on to iceberg, is you also have to have a process that is easily engaged with.
Yes.
So
I take that for granted.
You do, because again, that kind of gets it grinds my gears when I think about like corporatization. Yes. I know for a fact I'm not a person that will ever fit in a large corporate environment, so I will say this with a big grain of salt. But the more layers that you put in, the harder it is for an individual who's just starting out to engage with something that is meaningful and shows them what fulfillment is. It's not impossible, but it just, the layers of separation between ultimately like where these decisions come from and how they are implementing them makes that a harder transition. So that's why you'll just hear it from us all the time. We're pretty much anti-corporate. And the more that you can perpetuate local influence, local being community, absolutely, but also just internally, the more that one person can make a difference in a clinic that is ultimately helps fulfill the mission, the more likely they will be to engage your process, and the more likely they will be to ultimately become star players. But the opposite of that is when you can engage with process and you have these people that are just kind of this wishy-washy, or they just are there for themselves, it pushes them down into being icebergs.
Yes, absolutely. So iceberg, as defined, is now the sort of opposite of star player. So icebergs are low performance, low potential. So of course, in the last 45 minutes, we've kind of discussed different ways in which you can get to the iceberg category. But low performance and low potential is an iceberg struggles with performance, an iceberg struggles deals with the potential of professional advancement. So that's either it's individual advancement or industrial advancement. But an iceberg will sink the mightiest of ships, really saying that these individuals not only affect the performance and potential themselves, but they really do affect the entire team, and they focus on themselves instead of serving the patient. So for us, it's, that's why we're so quick to really move icebergs on their way, because if we're all sort of pointed in the right direction, all pointed in the same direction, all pointed towards this shared purpose and this shared well-being, is that when you have people that, problem children that aren't engaging the system, we have backbones that have lost fulfillment, and they're really starting to kind of tip down into this iceberg categories. They pull more people with them. It's just what happens. Now, it's not necessarily that they pull people with them because they're engaging in conversation or in communication which challenges shared purpose and well-being. So yes, these are people who are either directly or indirectly creating division, but it's not always the way in which they're talking. The indirect way in which we divide is just like, or having kind of the body language, or having, they stop helping switch shifts. They stop, engaging just normal process. Like, I'm taking my lunch now. And it's like, well, you've been here for 90 minutes, like these ways in which we have icebergs that just, they're not going to go anywhere except take you down.
Yeah, it's a tough thing, because really what happens is, you either have somebody who you believed to be high potential, and through the course of time in practice, you realize that they don't have it. Or you have somebody who has shown at least a fundamental, like a high performance ability, and then they choose not to.
It's not what they thought, or whatever it
that's
is.
Typically the one that's a little bit harder. Like the quick in, quick out is the typically the potential one of like, well, I thought it was this, but it's actually this, and this really doesn't meet the standard that we kind of need. So like, how are you going to fix that? And then the answer is, I don't know, or this is a bullshit job. That was we're bringing that one back. And then it's like, okay, well, you go elsewhere.
And you'll find it. Like that's the thing. Like, there are absolutely jobs out in this world that have teams exclusively built on people who only care for themselves. That exists.
It does. Or they just don't know what it is that really, gets them going. And like they need a different mentor that has a different purpose and doing a different thing to really hit them the right way for them to be directed in a X way. You just have to know, like, if it ain't here, like, don't hold on to them, because you're not doing either side any favors.
And it becomes ultimately, when you talk about new hires or even people that have been there for a while, it's like what we refer to as the war of attrition. It's like you just have to be willing to, as an individual, you may have to be willing to go through 5 different jobs to find the seat that you can sit in. Same thing as an employer. You have to be willing to put 5 different people in the same seat before this one person is comfortable in there. So it is both sides when you sort of just be like, yep, this just didn't work out. I'm sorry we don't have what you're looking for. The other side, I'm sorry this didn't work out. You just don't have what I'm looking for. So it's both sides, administratively and individual. But yeah, so that's kind of at least this first chart of the star chart is potential and performance. Honestly, I think we were originally thinking about making this a 2-part series, but I think it's naturally kind of rolling into a 3-part. So what we'll do is, at least for this time, we'll kind of conclude today's session. And then next session, we're going to pick up with, let's see here, clarity and consistency as sort of the next move in on our star chart. So thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you guys in the next session.